Seems like no matter how many times you do it, it just doesn't seem familiar. So every time it seems like, oh, I got this working okay. And then the next time it's different. So trying to get the flare out of there from this one light, which is, which one? Let me just go see. Holler if it turns off, you guys. Nope. Not better. Okay. Okay, that's different. Nope. Okay. Well, we're just gonna have to deal with it. Okay, so your free ticket for Looking Forward, Looking Back, which is the musical review, you need to arrange with the box office. So I will send you an announcement. You'll do a performance report on this, and your performance report guidelines are already in your modules. We took a look at those last week. Do you remember that? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. We don't need to review. So I will send an announcement for that, and we'll be all set to go. I sent it to my other class already, not trying to single you guys out. Sorry about that. Let me just make a note so I don't forget, because my brain is a sieve these days. But it opens the 17th, and I mean the stream opens the 17th, and it goes until November 3rd, I think. And you will see the performers. They have been dressed. There's lighting, there is some staging, and you can make your comments accordingly. Okay. Does Shira brought something up about how to submit the seams assignment? So I'm just going to review that. Did anyone else have a problem with that? Have you submitted your seams? Miranda, did you?
Not yet, no.
So let's just go there, and this is, oh, sorry, I need to screen share. Miranda was in Looking Forward, Looking Back, and she came in on Saturday. So here's the modules, right? The sewing machine instructions and recorded lecture. This is the assignment icon, and you can tell because it has points, okay? This is the lab where we worked on that. So if I click on this, you'll see machine stitching, the recorded lecture for that, some of the ideas about machine stitching that we discussed during the lecture. This is an overlock stitch, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then here's the seams that you're doing. And at the end of this is where you upload. You get 5 points each and you upload. Now I want to remind you that you'll take a picture of it, right? You'll take a picture of the entire page. So the entire page is going to show me your directions and your function. For example, you'll take a picture of a page that looks like this, or you can put this in the Google document and then just take a picture of your seam. So in this particular seam, machine stitching French seam, it gives me how to do it and what it's for. And then here's a picture of it. And ideally you want to show me a picture that includes being able to look at the fact that the seam is encased inside, so that the right side looks like a regular seam. The inside is completely covered and no seam finish is showing. And then the small seam is on the very inside. So it really is an entire document like this. If you have it mounted on the template page, you can take a picture of that, but do show me the close-ups of these few items.
Hey, Pam,
Go ahead.
can you remind us where those sheets are?
Yes, sure. Absolutely. So those sheets they're under hand sewing because they work for everything. So let's go back to the modules. So this is the one we just looked at. From here, I'm going to go back to modules. And you don't have to make them this way, but if you want to, it's completely fine. So under modules, if you just look from the top to the bottom, you'll see that it says, it will say sewing resource portfolio contents and template. So this is just an information page. Here's your sewing resource portfolio. I don't want to do that. I'm gonna open it right here. This is what it looks like. This is how many items are going to be in the notebook, right? So these are the ones we've done so far. These two we're doing today. You've done your stitching maze. You can download and do the stitched one with this thread. That's what this asterisk means. You've done your hand sewing samples. The blind stitches in the book if you wish to get extra credit. The asterisk always is indicating extra credit. We've done the closures, hook and bar, snap, Velcro, or zipper is extra credit, and the thread shank button we're going to do today. So that's, first of all, that is your notebook. That's the entire sewing portfolio that you're assembling. And then the template is here. Here's the blank template. Hand sewing, how to, this you'd make machine sewing, French seam, how to, blah, 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 and the use for it, and then mount your sample. It's really simple. You don't even need to download this. But if you have a question, you can look at the one that is filled out, which is, here's the sample page. Please do one page for each of your, it should say for all your sewing samples. So this is hand sewing running stitch, also called basting, how to. Whether you do it in paragraph form or whether you do it numerically or you do an outline, that's completely up to you. This book is for you. Then the use, the running stitch is used temporarily to hold 2 or more layers together. It is easily removed after the permanent stitch is in place. That's its function. And then you mount it. So you can do that. You can do, you can make any kind of a template that you want. Any questions before I leave the page? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Is that helpful? But again, you can create a different page. It doesn't have to be exactly that. I did that after because people were not knowing. I mean, I just did them like this so that you would understand. And it's just very helpful because once we get past the stitch, if you don't know how to do the stitch, it will help you, it will remind you how to do the stitch. And in the future, like in 6 months, if you need to do, oh, what was that seam? Because now I'm working with this shear thing that I need to repair, then you'll know what it is. Okay. Any other questions about that? Did anybody try their buttonhole?
No.
I need you to try it so that we can see if you need help. Okay. That would be really important. And I'm going to now I'll just do an overview of what we'll do today. So we know how to put our seams on the template. Your hand sewing should be on the template. Take a photograph of it. If you can take a pretty good close photo and upload it, I can enlarge it and read it. So don't worry about that. Try to make it as easy as possible and then try to collect them in some way so that you can easily find them. This book is organized by machine stitching, by hand stitching first, machine stitching, and then closures. So you'll want to take a look at that. Okay. What we're going to do today is we're going to discuss sewing on a button. Because this is something we want to use silamide for, which is our extra thread, and do a thread shank. These are some technical terms that allow us to have movement in the button. The other thing we'll do is we're going to do ruffle, which is that small, you have your sample of 7 by 7 and a 3 by 14, which is also a gathering stitch. So you'll learn a new technique, and then hopefully we'll have time to do understitching. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief overview of each one of these things, and then we'll go into the meat of it so that you can see what they are. So I'm going to try and get that a little bit better on the screen, so that I'm sorry about that one flare right here. Okay, what do we do? What do we mean by a button with a thread shank? So good question. And why would we use that? Well, I'm going to give you, I had to actually do a button with a thread shank last week, and I'll show you why. This is a jacket that we used in the show. It had been missing one button, but we couldn't replace it because the buttons are leather. So they're very specific. So we ended up replacing all 4. Now this button is a shank button, right? Remember, shank has this loop that's underneath the button. See the loop? And that's on our button page. So in order to stitch this on, I made a knot on this side, stitched 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches through, wrapped it around below the shank, and then made a tiny knot on the inside. And the reason why is when the jacket's open, you don't want to see thread in here. So I want to show you this thread shank up very close. Oops, just a second, let me get this person in. So here is the shank. And then here's the thread underneath, wrapping around the shank so that it has a lot of flexibility. See how much movement there is here? Why is that important? Because when this jacket is buttoned, let me get a mannequin. Okay. When this jacket is buttoned, there is a significant thickness to this garment right here. So the button needs to have flexibility to go through the garment and rest on top without pinching the cloth. Okay, we don't want the cloth to be distressed here. So this has a lot of movement, and the buttonhole moves around, and that's simply the nature of a button and buttonhole. Can you see that okay? Better?
Better.
Okay, let me unbutton it, and you'll see then the thickness of the garment here. That's fairly significant. This had a shank, but without that extra play, it would not rest easily in this buttonhole. And the idea is you want the button to seem natural, not to pinch the fabric. And if this doesn't have movement, it will flatten the fabric down and stay like a rock. So the shank is important on any button. You want to adjust that based on the buttons that on the button and the fabric that you're using. So we talked about buttons and about the sew through button. We have the sew through button on our sample. We talked about having the button sewn through, and you sew it through the same direction as your buttonhole. If your buttonhole is vertical, you want to have your eyes on your button be vertical. Okay, so when you're stitching that, you're stitching it in line. If you stitch it horizontally, it will spread the buttonhole out. And spreading the buttonhole out is unattractive and interrupts the line of the garment. When we talk about the line of the garment, it seems sort of silly, but it really isn't. It really is something that is the difference between a poorly made garment and a professional garment. And here you can see the thread shank under this button. The thread has been stitched through, round around several times, goes to the back, and then makes the knot. Okay, so if you don't have silamide, and you may not, then you're going to use 4 threads. I'll show you how to thread that. Here's another sew through button. Let's see if I can get it a little brighter. There you go. And this has been done in a flower pattern. And that's, wow, I can't tell how to, I can't tell how to make it in the camera because it's so reversed. Okay, that's a flower pattern. So it's a 4-hole. They could be sewn in a different way, but this is sewn like a flower. See how it's, or an arrow. Let me turn it over. And now it's like a flower. And that does give it kind of a low profile, and it's on a horizontal buttonhole. So it will still be okay. It's a very large button, like a jacket button. So it has also a large shank underneath. The shank gives it this distance between the button and the fabric. So we even have something called the button elevator. I think we discussed that briefly, which lifts that button up. And I'll just show you that. So that you really know how big a space we're talking about. So this is the button elevator. It starts at 1/4 of an inch, 1/8, 1/4, 3/8 and a half. So this button would have been stitched with the quarter. You can see that this will fit under. And that is indicating the thickness of the fabric that will be pushed underneath that every single day when the jacket is buttoned. That's why you need that much space. Okay, if you don't have silamide, which is, or tailor's thread, you can buy tailor's thread at the yardage shop. But if you have regular thread, what you want to do is do 4 threads. So let me show you that. Here's my regular needle. And this can be challenging for you because what you're doing is you're getting not just 1 thread through here, but 2 threads. So I put 1 thread through and hold it on the shaft of the needle and pull it down so that I have the maximum amount of eye left. Okay, so that you can see this eye right here. Let me see if I can put it in the white screen. There you go. So I have my thread through and my eye, and then I simply take my second piece of thread. You didn't see me lick it. If you're working at home, it's fine. And then I put it through. Okay. Now what I have is 2 threads on one side and a loop on the other side. All right. So I will pull my thread up, and pull my loop up. Oh, let's see, where am I? There we go. Okay, and then I'll cut the loop so that I'm doing that. And then do my knot, wrap it around, push it off the end of my finger and make a knot. Now I have a good body of thread to sew my button on. And for the button, you just need to go through 3 times, okay? So. You have a 2-hole button. You'll hide your thread underneath your fabric. You'll bring it up through, you'll sew through, go back through to the back of the button, around 1, 2, 3. And then on the back side, make your 2 knots, hide your thread. So let's see how that looks with our button. Here's my sampler. Here's my buttonhole cut vertically. So I'm going to sew my button vertically like this, okay? How many of you stitched your button on already? If you sew your buttons like this, you will never have them fall off. It's so fabulous. So it really is terrific. I'm just taking this button off that I stitched on. I have to take it off because it's industrial. Okay. So I'm going to put my button on. And if you want to, and you don't have the button elevator, and you can't just let your button be loose, which is kind of hard, then you put 2 pins above and you sew over the 2 pins. So I'm not sure I can do this standing up, but we'll try. So here's my button. A button has a right and a wrong. This button has a right side because it has a rim around it, and it has a curve. So look at this, where your button would be put on. The curve goes away from the body. And then I need to find out where am I going to stitch this button on, through which buttonhole. So when you do your buttonholes, if you're doing a whole line of buttonholes, you do those all first. You make sure they're even first before you cut them. Then you cut all of them, and then you make sure you find out where is your button going to be placed. So I'm going to put my pin through and get my button placement. Right in the center. Okay. And remember, we had our buttonhole placement. So that's right in the center. I know that my button is more than 1/2 of the diameter away from the edge, so it won't hang off. It'll be right on target, okay? Because if I'm sewing it this way, it needs to sit in the middle of the buttonhole, and it needs to be that far away. So let me get my placement. You can mark that with a pin or with a chalk or with a pencil. I'm using the pin method. Then I'm going to hold my button in place. Get my thread. My thread, which has disappeared. Here we go. Okay. Anchor my thread underneath on the back side. I see where my button's going, so I'm going to anchor my thread there. pull that through to the right side. And you want to try and sew on the right side as much as possible. So I will put my button on this way. And then I'm going to sew on the right side. I'm not going to stab through and then go like this, pull through and push up the other side. What I'm going to do is loosen my button and just take a little bite where it needs to go. Remember, a button needs to be loose anyway, so this button's kind of hanging down and then I pull it up. And I see that it's there. It's too tight. I'm going to pull it out so that I have enough room for a shank. And then I can simply go through this side again. Up.
Do you shank every button?
Yep.
Ah.
Yeah, because even your shirt has, like, this is a lightweight garment. You guys are working with lightweight. So I'm going to move my pin now. Yeah, you're working with lightweight, but if you nail this down, you will not be able to get your shirt buttoned properly. So this is my third. That's all I need because I'm sewn with 4 threads. This is my shank. And you can just do it 2 times. Wrap it around. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and now it will sit up off of that piece of fabric. See that? It sort of tightens it together, sits off the fabric. Then I push it through right at the base of my button. And this is the time I go to the back side. And now I just do my two knots and hide the tail. So I do 1. If my thread is short, a trick that you can do is put the back of your needle through, because I didn't have room to turn it around. So you could do 2 and then hide your thread in this facing. So I'm hiding it, I'm checking this side, it doesn't show. I'm pulling it out and I'm cutting. So now it doesn't show on the wrong side or the right side.
Pam, did you do the holes for the button on Wednesday?
Yes.
Did you post a lecture for it? Because I didn't see anything
Okay.
for that.
There you go. Okay. All right. So the buttonhole, yeah, you know what? Let me check and see the lecture. Okay. Also, you need to look up the buttonhole mechanism for your own machine and what your particular machine does for buttonhole. Okay. So that's one thing that you need to do. So I'll make sure right after class and post it. So any questions on the thread shank? If you are sewing a button on with a shank, and this is a small shank, right? And it's not a very thick piece, you maybe don't need to do the shank underneath the metal shank. But that would be if your fabric is pretty thin. Questions on the buttonhole?
Can you show me how you threaded your thread again?
The double thread?
Yeah.
Sure. Let me actually see if I sit down, if this will help. Wow. I'm actually I want to show you the ruffle before I sit down. Okay. So I'm going to pull my thread off. Right. Now, if I'm going to sew a bunch of thread, I'm going to end up with 1/4 the size of my thread, right? So here's 1, 2. That's what we usually sew with. So I'm going to just do another one. We sew from the wrist to the elbow because that is the length we want to work with. This is now too long, but I'm going to double it. Remember the idea of the beeswax. If you have uncooperative thread, you can just rub it over the beeswax and it makes it so it doesn't have as much ability to tangle. See how I'm just basically touching it over the beeswax. If you don't have beeswax, you can also, you probably have a beeswax candle. So You can actually thread both ends at once. Let's see if I can do that. Oh, where did I do? I took my thread out. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, same old, I'm gonna try and get out of the way here. There we go. Here's my thread, my needle. Where is it? There we go. I usually work with a camera, but it's much easier than this because this is reverse, so I can't figure it out. Where is my hand? There we go. Okay. So there's the needle eye. No, there's not the needle. You guys, I'm just a space cadet today. I can't figure this out. Okay. There's the needle eye. You can see it. Okay, I'll try not to move it. I have my 2 pieces of thread. I can stick them through at the same time. But if that doesn't work, that time it worked, miraculous, right? That worked, but I'll show you the single thread as well. So I have 1 thread. I'm going to put this through the needle eye. It doesn't want to go. Okay. Then I hold that end down on my needle shaft. So I'm holding it so it doesn't jump around. And then I take my other end. And really important, don't let that end be too long. So that previous one was too long. I'm working with 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to pull both sides down so it's very tight on my needle. And then I'm going to push this one through. It's through, it just doesn't want to go. There's a little burr on the end. There we go. Okay, so now I have 2 strands going through both ways, and I'm still holding this end here. You want to make sure that you hold both ends so that you don't lose that hard work. And then I'm going to pull my straight end, my cut ends, right? And my loop, which is here. Put them together. Make my needle flat. So even though I had that much thread, it's only taking up, you know, it doesn't even go to my elbow now. So, okay. You can cut this loop or not. And then wrap it around your finger, roll it off the edge of your finger, pinch it. Oops, too slippery. Wrap it around, make an X, roll it off the end, pinch it, and pull. And there's my knot. So now I have enough thread probably to do 2 or maybe 3 buttons. Okay, questions on the buttons? Excellent. I'm going to just demo now. I'm going to show you and then demonstrate the ruffle technique and the understitching technique. Let's go to screen share for just a moment so you can see this. In modules. Get off of the template. I betcha I didn't put it right here. Okay. Demo ruffle and understitching. So this is a ruffle. This flat piece of fabric is joined by a fuller piece of fabric. This is called Fullness. It's also used, whoops. Okay, let's go back there. Okay. It's also used for curtains, and particularly in stage draperies, we talk about a fullness in a ratio. A ruffle, which is this piece down here, is made by gathering a longer piece of fabric onto a smaller piece. So this is a longer piece onto a smaller piece. Directionally, the lengthwise grain is this way, and you can see by the pattern that the lengthwise grain is still going the same direction. When you gather a longer piece of fabric onto a smaller piece, this creates fullness. We call that fullness. Fullness is a ratio of the longer piece to the shorter piece. For example, 2 to 1 would mean that the piece to be gathered is twice as long as the shorter piece. The example above shows a 2 to 1 fullness ratio. So your piece is 3 by 14, and 14 is 2 times as long as 7. So you are doing a 2 to 1 fullness ratio. But you can have a 1.5 to 1. In that case, your piece would be 10.5 inches. Or you can have 3 to 1, which would be very full, a lot of gathers, and that would be 21 inches to your 7 inches. So this is the document that you can follow for instructions. There are several different kinds of instructions here. So when you are making the ruffle, you cut a square 7 by 7 and 4 by 16, but your ruffle is 3 by 14. It's exactly a 2 to 1. Hem the edges of the square. So we're going to do the double fold 1/4 inch plus 1/4 inch and top stitch. Everyone knows how, everyone will do that. Now I will demo that. Hem the 2 short sides of the rectangle and 1 long side. So you can overlock, you can zigzag, you can pink and straight stitch, then fold it under and top stitch. This is marked out because I wanted you to be able to do 2 different kinds of machine hem finish. So as well as making the ruffle, you are doing 2 different kinds of machine hem finish, also known as the shirt tail hem. Use one hem finish for the rectangle and the other hem finish for the square. So I'm suggesting for the square, you're going to do fold and fold. And for the ruffle portion, you're going to do one of the less dense. Fold and fold gives you sort of a thick edge. So you're going to do a less dense edge, whether that's zigzag and turn and top stitch, or whether it's stitch, turn and top stitch, or pink, turn and top stitch, okay? So you'll be doing one of the less dense ones because it's not going to get a lot of wear. It's going to be against another piece of fabric. This is fold and fold right here because she's wearing it against a leg. But if it was up here, or we had a ruffle here and it was hanging down and there was a piece of fabric underneath, you would not need to worry about that. After you hem it, you're going to use your gathering stitch. This is, you finished the long edge with overlock or something on the top. This is this is the remaining long edge. One long side, you've already done a completely finished edge. This one does not need to be completely finished. You're going to do one using 5/8 of a seam allowance. You can hand gather, or using 5/8 of seam allowance, you can double machine basting stitch. And this is the one that we're going to work on today. You pull the thread to gather it. Then you pin the ruffle to the garment or to your 7 by 7 square. You adjust the gathers and machine stitch in place. So you can download that and take notes on that page if you want. And I'm going to diagram it on the board so that you can see it, and I'll show you and then I'll demo it. Before I demo, we'll take a quick break so that I can set it up and you can make any notes you need. So we have our 7 by 7 square. And we're talking about folding this up and top stitching. Because again, we don't want any rough edges. Okay, on your garment, you're not going to have any rough edges. You're going to fold up. So I'm going to do this in big view. If I fold this down once, I have a raw edge on the inside. If I fold it down a second time, Now my piece is smaller, right? But I have a folded edge here and my raw edge is inside. I can top stitch this near my fold. So this is one fold and then fold it again. Second fold, top stitch. When I demo, sorry, you know what I need to do? Are you guys looking at speaker view? I hope you're seeing it a little bit bigger. So when I demo, I'll show you that you will fold this in slightly so that when you top stitch, you've removed that piece and you will top stitch a less thick piece. So you will do miter corner. It reduces the bulk, okay? So you want your bulk reduced. This is for the garment or your 7x7 square. Any questions on preparing the garment piece? Questions? Okay. So up here,
Pam, I have a question. I'm not exactly, maybe when you demo it, it'll become clearer, but on how to create that mitered corner.
no, that's a demo thing.
Okay, all right.
So I will tell you though, when you fold and iron and fold and iron, you'll have a pattern here. Then you can fold this over and cut it so that you won't have a raw edge because you know what your end fold is going to look like. So I will demo that.
Okay,
It just makes it a very clean corner. If you're overlapping, it will make it a bulky corner and you'll have 4 layers here and 4 layers here, and your needle sometimes that wants to get caught. Good question. So when we do this, I'll show you that very specifically. Okay, your next piece is your 3x14. Sorry, that line really doesn't work for me. Okay. So what did the instructions say about this? What sides are we going to address here first, folks? This is going to be our ruffle.
2 short sides and 1 long side.
Yes. Okay. So these are my short sides and I'm picking 1 long side. So these have to be top stitched, folded in, and then stitched so that this is a fold. And this is a finished edge, but it is not folded in. Right? It's finished by either zigzag, by pinked, by just a stitching line. We'll finish that edge. What it does is it prevents raveling. That's all we want. So you're going to do that to 3 sides. Okay. This is the side that you're going to finish the edge just by zigzag or stitching or pinking. No folding. I've given you 2 ways to gather. One is by hand, which we've already learned. And the other one is at 5/8 of an inch. Both are at 5/8. And why do we use 5/8? Because 5/8 is the commercial pattern. That is the commercial pattern seam allowance. So we want to kind of be uniform with what is the industry standard seam allowance. When you get into costume construction, sometimes you do slightly different things, but let's work with the commercial pattern. So at this edge, you're going to machine baste, okay? Machine baste is our longest stitch. What are some rules about basting? First one.
Don't knot it.
Yes, exactly. So we're gonna have our thread out here and we're gonna stitch long stitches. Machine stitches are great because they're very uniform. Then you leave your tail. And you're going to do a second line of stitching. So if you stitch at exactly just inside the 5/8, now you're going to stitch just inside the 4/8. like this. The reason why you do that is because we're going to pull the thread to push the fabric together. And we will hold this, of course, you know, you have two sets of threads. You have two sets of top threads, two sets of bobbin threads. Okay. Same on this side. So I'm going to pull my bobbin thread and move my fabric along here to gather my ruffle. The reason why you do two lines of stitching is because often one can break. That way you don't get through the whole thing and then have it break. Okay. Once we get that far, we will mark a place that we're going to stitch it on to our garment. Fold the ruffle up. So it's here. Machine stitch. Fold the ruffle down, and then we'll have a ruffle here. And it will look like that little skirt that we had in our picture. And I'll show you how it's going to look with your fabric. Pretty stinking fun. So I used to have you do two, where you do both the hand and the machine, but it will look like this. So here is my fold and fold, so that you can see my folded edge, nothing showing, no raw edges. And here's overlock and top stitch, but on this side, it's just a finished edge. Underneath, just overlock, zigzag, or pinked. It's stitched on upside down and then folded down to create the ruffle. So on this one, you can clearly see the two lines of machine basting, which I want you to leave in. When we do a garment, we would normally take those out because sometimes they show like this. Okay, but I want you to leave them in so I can see them. If you look at this carefully, you'll see that I've pulled this and it makes the tension different. That's why it gathers. Okay, and then just one line of stitching to sew it onto the back. And then we press it down. Voila, we have our little ruffle. Or we have our Barbie doll clothes, or whatever you want. Okay, is that clear for everyone? Okay, clear as mud? All right. What's that?
Yeah, it's absorbing. I'm processing.
That's why we're going to stop there. We're going to take a break. I'm going to set up, I'm going to demo just the ruffle. Okay. So review the ruffle page and I'll set it up. We'll be back at 10:30. I'm sitting at my machine, but the first thing I'm going to do is go to my ironing table. And that's very typical for all of our sewing. Remember, 10% of our time is at the machine. So let me get this table a little bit better organized. There we go. So up at our ironing table, I have our things prepared so that I can show you. And I'm going to, shoot, sorry, I realize now this is not a good color because here. Because it's white, it's muslin on muslin. So let me just get this piece of black here so that you can see this more clearly. So I can make a flat spot. So you can look at this, turn my water on up here. Remember, this is gravity feed. So I've heated the iron, it's on, and I'm turning my water on so that I can have steam when I press this button, okay? And here's my square, my 7 by 7. I'm going to just iron it flat. I have 2 pieces, so I can show you a couple of techniques on this. This is my ruffle. You can see that I'm using 2 to 1. This is double my fullness. So there we are. I want to make sure those are clear. And I realized that maybe we had not adequately discussed the bias. So in case you do have to do a bias sample for your notebook, I want you to make sure that you know what a bias is. So I'm going to demo that first on this piece. A bias, it happens because it creates a 45-degree angle from your 90. So remember that, just a second, I'm going to do this. Okay. So remember that an interlocking woven piece is 2 threads interlocking at 90 degrees. And our weft, or our cross thread, has more stretch than our warp. So I'm trying to figure out which is the warp and which is the weft. And I think I had it correct. Even though it's counterintuitive, this is the lengthwise grain. It's shorter, but it doesn't matter. If I fold this edge to this edge, I create an actual 45-degree angle by making this triangle. Okay. So I have folded one edge down to the other edge. I know it's exactly a 45-degree angle if I match these 2 pieces together. Okay, that's my 45. There's my grain, and I know it because I can stretch that. So to put a piece of bias in your book, simply fold your sample, cut a piece of this. I'm going to just draw a line. If I can get over my trash can. Okay, so I have one line and I have my folded line, and I'll cut. And then that gives me my bias sample. This is my straight of grain. So you want to mount it with your straight of grain here and here. And that's my bias on the 45, okay? So there's my straight of grain, and there's my bias. And that's when I say do a bias sample, that's all you need to do is just cut one so that you know what that is. Sometimes we make a ruffle on a bias because it creates a softer edge. One other thing about ruffle that we didn't talk about is when you ruffle with the lengthwise grain, and I said that's the way it is on our picture in on our canvas page. If you ruffle lengthwise grain, remember lengthwise falls along the body. If you ruffle on the crosswise grain, you get it to stick out. That's called a dirndl skirt. That's the way the dirndl skirt works. That's why it's so poofy. All right, let's go to our machine. Oh, not ready yet, right? Because the first thing I have to do is fold my edge in. So I'm going to fold all the way around, and then I'm going to fold again. So I'm ready to top stitch. When I go back to my machine, I'm going to also want to fold. When I go back to the iron, I'm also going to want to fold this. So I'm going to just do a zigzag finish. On my ruffle edge, so that when I go to my machine, I'm going to do all my ironing at once. When I go back to the ironing table. Okay. Turn on my machine to make sure it's plugged in. We have janitors that come in and stuff. And we have a different kind of thing sometimes every day. I'm going to make sure that if my machine is threaded, that I unthread it, and I make sure that it's actually threaded accurately. So remember, most threading starts at the top, comes along the left, and whether it comes under a thread guide at the top or a thread guide around the side, then it comes down, up, and down. The upside down stork head grabs it. So a couple of people were using the FOF that threaded this way, so it threads reverse, and they had it caught on this, which was then making the stitching not accurate, okay? So if you're stitching, if your thread gets caught on some extra thing, that's gonna make your tension wrong, okay? It'll make it tight on the top. So I've come across, down, up, down. Now I'm gonna go through my thread guide and thread front to back. I always put my finger back there, you know, you can see it. You can see your hole, and then your finger can catch it. Okay, so I know now my threading is correct. Make sure it doesn't loop around that needle. And I'll check my bobbin, okay? I'm getting my flipper, I'm holding my flipper first, so my bobbin does not fall out. And good thing I checked, because it was set for buttonhole, which is when it's threaded through that little finger. So I'm going to take this out completely. Check to make sure for my purposes, I want it to spool clockwise. So we'll unspool clockwise. I put it into my bobbin, matching the holes, putting it around to the edge, underneath this, through the slot, and underneath this tension piece, little spring right here. And it goes through the hole in the top. And now I can see that it's spooling clockwise. So I'm ready to hold on to my flipper again. And then I'm going to put it in. For this machine, I have to align that little finger. For others, your opening just goes to the top. And it should snap in. You didn't hear it snap though, but I'm going to take it out and make it snap in so that you can at least hear it. If it doesn't snap, it's not a problem, but there you go. Okay. Here's my bobbin piece. Here's my top piece. I'm going to roll this one roll towards me. Here we go. And pull it up. And then I make sure that it goes through my presser foot to the back. Okay, I'm going to do my 2 short sides and my 1 long side with straight stitch. So I have to get my, I'm wondering why this isn't staying down. So it's because my bobbin hole device is still engaged. So now I put it to 0. Now I can move the rest of my stitching length and my stitch width, which I want to be, I guess I'll put it on 2.5, and I'll put my stitch on just a little shorter than 2 so that I can stitch my zigzag to finish this edge. And now I'll stitch my long piece. So my machine is pulling that through. I'm not pulling my fabric. I'm stepping on it. I do have it floored, but I'm stepping on it and it is zigging and pulling the fabric through with the feed dog. Notice I do not need to backstitch because this is not a stitch that's holding two pieces of fabric together. Make sure your thread is about 6 inches out, just so you don't have to rethread again. And I will be stitching again. So often, if we were here on campus, we would do this with an understitch machine, and I'll show you that as well. But
Hey, Pam, I have a question. Is there a wrong side and a right side to doing a zigzag stitch?
So I'm sewing on the wrong side. You can sew on the right side. There's no wrong or right to your zigzag. If it looks differently, it may be that your tension's not quite accurate. Okay, so both sides. This is the side I was sewing on, and this is the other side, the right side. Both sides should look identical. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. All right, I'm ready to go back to my iron. So I have 2 pieces that I need to prepare. We'll finish with this one first. This is the piece that I have done the zigzag on. So I'm going to fold it in to make my 1/4 inch. Like this. And I'll fold the long side in and iron it. And that zigzag is going to help me fold it in. If you don't have a zigzag, your straight stitch will help you fold it in. And I forgot to say this while I was doing it, but remember that your presser foot is about 1/4 inch. So if you are stitching it, and this is at almost exactly 1/4 inch, then I can fold this in right on that line, and it will be 1/4 inch. So I hold my hands and my fingers to press this down before I iron, so that it's going to be pretty accurate. Okay, I'll try and do it lefty so that you can see it. Just going to press it right down there. Okay. Now I'll show you how to do that mitered corner. I'm going to press first. All right. So now I have my edges pressed in, and I can unfold this edge, and I've made a crease so that I can actually fold this in and then fold my 2 pieces in. Here's my crease. I can fold that in on a diagonal, fold this back on my fold and fold this on my fold, and I can get a mitered corner so that I'm not stitching over something like this.
So it's kind of like a hospital fold on
Yeah.
a bed sheet, right? Or a
Right.
hospital tuck. Okay.
You don't want to have this. The reason why you want to avoid this is because then you end up with these things sticking out. So I'm just going to fold this in on the corner like this. And that 1/4 that I've already done gives me the amount that I need to fold up into my fold and then fold down. And then I have a nice angled piece, which I can now show you. I'll press that in place. Whether you're mitering wood or fabric, it's the same. So now it looks like this, which is a much tidier and prettier finish. That makes sense for everybody? So I'm going to do this other edge, same. Fold it in, press it. And then fold my other side in. That steam is very hot. So now I have another mitered corner. So I have two mitered corners. Now let's work on our 7x7 piece. I'm going to fold all the way around first. And then I'm going to fold again. Okay, just a second. I have a chat. Let me see if I can read it. Okay, so this is a machine sewing thing, and you do need to have a sewing machine to do it. And I have sewing machines you can borrow. So here we go. I'm folding this in. I'm going to fold all my 1/4 inch around, all the way around first. You can do about 3/8 of 1/4. I'm doing 3/8. And again, if you did a line of stitching, it would be even easier to turn in. So now I have this turned in all the way around. I'm not worrying about the corners yet. Then I'm going to do my second crease just to secure it and get my lines. So you see I'm holding my corners in while I'm doing that with my fingers. And the difference will be I would definitely say 1/4 and 1/4 is going to be really tight. So I'm doing 3/8. So the reason why we don't want to do it this way and sew it is because we get these really ugly corners. Now I'm going to unfold. And look at how much when I unfold. I can take this, I'm going to cut this off right here. Then I can fold and fold in and it will be finished. So I'm going to cut my corners off. Cut them above. You want to cut at this first fold line, right across there. So here's my cut across my first fold line. Okay. I'm cutting directly on that bias. And one thing about the bias, remember, is it does not ravel. So I'm reducing bulk. And even if a little of that showed, it's on the inside and it won't ravel. There's my 4 corners. And now I can go back and fold them in and fold them in, and they're I need to cut it even more. Let's just a second. Let's see how much I need to cut it. That worked for 1. I need to cut it at the second fold line. Always good to have to cut again instead of making a mistake and then having it be wrong. So don't worry about checking it and making it, having to do it again, like I just did. Because it's perfect for the first fold, right? Look at how beautiful it is. But for the second one, not so pretty. So let's just get that. Folded. Okay. Now I can fold that in, and I've reduced that bulk so that underneath is like this, and then my other one will be folded on top. Trying to make it even without burning myself. So I'm folding my bias under and pressing on my diagonal. Like that, and then I'm folding it and folding it. Fold and fold, fold and fold. So there's our two little pretty edges compared to the less pretty edges. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, time to go back to the machine. Second, I want to respond here. Here we go. So you would want to stitch with, of course, coordinating thread. I'm stitching with dark so you can see it. So first I'm going to stitch around my edges, trying to be uniform at 1/4 of an inch, which is my presser foot. I'm constantly tending my threads so that they're not going to get into my gear mechanism. I'm going to work from the inside. Don't start at the corner. The corner is going to have your thickness. So you want, I'll show you a trick. You can start in the middle with your 1/4 of an inch. And I'm still going to be right at my 2.5. I want to make sure I'm on straight stitch again. And leave your tails, don't backstitch. I'm going to show you a trick. And this is where our angle is very important. Put your needle in and pivot, right? Remember we did that with our paper angle pattern. I need some a little smaller than my finger. Okay. That's good. Not good. One more stitch. Trying to get it in the right place. Okay. I'm at the miter, so I want to make sure I catch that. Be right there. So I'm looking through the hole of my presser foot to make sure I'm at the place that I want to be. I have my thread sticking out right here. Now you can backstitch, but I want to show you something about that. All right. So this is how it looks. You want to stitch along your fold line. And on the outside, we have a nice even line of stitching. Okay. Now this is the place where my thread has joined and I don't want it to appear unattractive. So I'm going to pull my threads to the inside. So you note that I have 2 sets of threads. There's my top thread. Here's my underneath thread. I'm going to pull my underneath thread. Just a second, I need to get a pin to show you. Sorry, my wheel is stuck in the anti-fatigue mat. All right, so I pulled that and created a loop. And I can pull that loop. I'm on the inside of my fabric. If I pull that loop right here, I'm making one of these threads disappear. Okay. So now I'm pulling that through to the other side of the garment. Now I have one thread on the outside. See that? And then I can pull the other thread. And I see that I have my loop right here. I'll pull it. So you can also backstitch. I'm just giving you a very nice way to finish it. So if I pull that loop, which is here, I can pull this thread through. Okay. And then you can actually get used to that so you don't even have one thread overlapping. And then you just hand tie these in a knot on the inside so that you have a nice uninterrupted stitching line. So this is just a knot, right over left, left over right. And then I'll cut it. Sometimes you have to do that kind of thing. For your sample, it's okay if you backstitch. Okay, it just looks better. This is done. It's finished. Putting it aside. And now I'm going to stitch my other piece. And you want to stitch close to your raw edge because you don't want this to fold back on the outside. So I don't want it to come like this. And some of you may have remembered when you have a shirt or something and it's not correctly done, when you wash it, then the inside folds to the outside. And we really don't want that. So we're just going to stitch this down close to where my zigzag is. So I'm using the outside of my foot again. This time I don't have to backstitch. I made that choice. I'm coming up to my mitered edge. Pivot. Okay, and then up to my mitered edge again. Pivot. I did not backstitch. You don't need to. You're not folding 2 pieces of fabric together. So now this is secured. This can't roll out. Okay, and on the other side, it's completely finished. So I'm just going to press that in place for a minute. And then what's the next thing I'm going to do? Anybody? Now I have to make my gather stitch. So what stitch am I going to use with my machine? Think about it.
The running stitch or the basting stitch.
Correct. That is absolutely correct. So I'm going to do my basting stitch, and where am I going to do that? Remember, our 5/8 of an inch is our commercial pattern.
So on the long edge.
This is the 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to measure it down on the long edge. That's correct. I'm going to do this on the right side of my fabric. So I know what my 5/8 of an inch is. Ooh, that's ugly. Let's get rid of that. And remember, you can note on your sewing machine, here's my 5/8. Well, I want to sew just inside my 5/8. And I'm going to move this all the way down to the longest stitch. So whether your longest stitch is here or whether it's here, it might be 5, it might be 6, it might be 7. So I'm going to put it here at 4/8 of an inch, leaving my long tails. Pulling that out, leaving tails. So there's my one stitch. Okay, all the way across. Then I'm going to do a second one just inside that, making sure my needle's full upright position. It was trying to hide down there. And making sure these don't get tangled up in back. So I'm going to hold them both. And I'm going to stitch right alongside this. So both my loose threads are out here, so they're not going to get tangled up and into the feed dog. Here we go. You want to make sure you don't cross that thread. All the way up, take up lever all the way to the top, pull it out. Now I have 2 lines of stitching that are in my longest stitch. To gather this, I need to separate the bobbin from the top. So this underneath piece is the bobbin, and those 2 are the top, just like we just did for the knot. Here's my 2 bobbin pieces on the back side. Here's my 2 top pieces, okay? I'm going to work with the bobbin side. I'm going to separate that on both ends. That's getting a little, it's getting a little tied up with this thread. So that happens, right? You have to just make sure that you're patient and that you're untangling everything. So here comes one, that's positive. And I see this thread, which is this piece of my ruffle, and I need to get rid of that, this white piece. Okay, let me look at I have that one loose, that's good. So they actually did get tangled up right here. Boy, it's got to be about as exciting as watching paint dry. But it's good for you to know that it doesn't take it's not a mastermind. Anybody can get their thread tangled up. It's a matter of being patient and getting it untangled. And that's the thing about, I always hated it about cooking shows because they always had the food ready and then magically, voila, it came out of the oven. And it's like, it never works that way for me. Cooking's not my favorite anyhow. So I had to untangle that. And now I have them completely separate. So here's my 2 top pieces. And here's my 2 bottom pieces. Okay, remember I'm going to use the bobbin thread. So I know I have to get this roughly in half. And I'm not really going to measure that. I'm going to pull on the 2 bobbin, wrap it around my finger, and then pull my fabric along and see how it will actually gather up on here by just holding tension on that bottom piece and sliding it along the top piece. I'm moving those ruffles down. The reason why you do it from 2 ends is because you could pull it all the way out from the other side. So now I'm going to pull from the other side to the center. Then I'm going to take a quick measurement. So I'm pulling from this side, moving my fabric along. My fingers are about this far apart, and I'm just pulling it like this along this fold edge. Okay, I'm taking a look. Okay, I'm getting a gather happening. Here's my little ruffly duffly. So now I'm going to see if it's even and is it close to what my fabric is. So let's take a look. Here's my fabric. And I can make it a little tighter, but I'm at the perfect place to start. To sew this onto an even piece, you can either draw a line or you can just press. So I'm just going to press this up so it's even, and I'm going to sew along my pressed line. So here I go. Across my obstacle course. Okay, because my stitching is even, if I make my ends even, then I have a place that I can sew it. Okay, so I'm just going to use that line. You can draw a line if you wish. Remember, we're going to sew this upside down. So this is going to end up being my skirt this way and hiding this piece. So upside down, I'm going to pin the ends to my stitching line. And this is, I know that my stitching line is at 5/8 of an inch, and that's going to be my stitching line. So I'm pinning this right on the edge, my ruffle stitched right on the edge. My 5/8 of an inch is just underneath my gather stitch, and I'll pin my other side as well. Just under my 5/8 of an inch. This is one place where you absolutely have to pin. So don't shirk your pinning duties here. So now I'm looking at my piece. I need to make it a little bit tighter, and I simply can pull on my long threads and move it along this edge. So you see how that tightens it up? And now I can work from my other side. And if I make it a bit, and I'm working both from the, there we go. And if I make it a bit over tight, I can just ease this out until it's on my piece. Okay, so if I see it needs a little bit of tending, this is a little flat, I'm going to move this over with my finger to make that all even. And then I'm going to use this line and pin so that my pins bridge the line. So my pin is here, bridging the line on this side and bridging the line on this side so that I know exactly where I'm pinning and where I'm sewing. So now I'm pressing this down with my fingers and I'm going to put in 2 pins. Make sure that your ruffle is even across your fabric. Okay, so I'm going to look at this. Okay, not even, so I'm going to move this a little bit. Let's see. Sorry, guys. I'll do it this way. So I'm looking at it this way, and it was hanging down. I want this to be absolutely even, so I'm going to pull this side up a bit. Now that looks better to me, okay? And if I look on the back, my pins are roughly in line with that stitch, with my folded line. Right there, okay? One more look to make it even. Make my pins even. If I needed to gather something a lot, I would take my extra fabric, my extra thread, and do a figure 8 around my pin like this. And then this is locked in place so that when I pull from this side, I'm not going to pull my thread out. And then I want to make this taut. So that's what I'm going to work on now. Make this absolutely firm here so that everything's nice and even. Okay, now I'm ready to stitch, and I will be stitching at 2.5, my regular straight stitch. I'll be stitching with 0 stitch width. This time I will absolutely backstitch, taking care that all of these threads are not going to get knotted up into my feed dog. And now I need to make sure that I'm at 5/8 of an inch. Now I can't see it, right? So I will use my seam gauge to make sure I'm at 5/8 of an inch. But I have a pretty good idea because I stitched this at 4/8. It's going to be right underneath here. And put your needle in, backstitch, and then continue on. So I'm going to hold my finger here to flatten this down along with my pins. But again, I'm not forcing my fabric through. The feed dog is going to do all the work. Ruffles want to jump around, so you want to be respectful of that. And I'm going to pull this out because I have the thread wound up there, and I'll just remove that. Make sure I'm on my fabric completely. And backstitch. I'm not going to cut my gather stitch. Please don't cut your gather stitch. You can cut your machine stitch. I want to see that you've pulled it this way, okay? Take my pins out. Take a look at my stitching line. So I'm uniformly just below my gather, which is okay. Here's my gather stitch. And now I'm going to fold this down so that I have my skirt. And I will press that. Be right back. So actually, I realized I should probably show you how I press that because that's maybe a little tricky. So all I did was I laid my fabric down with my ruffle away from me, used the point of the iron and pressed that seam flat so that the seam is nice and flat and my skirt is hanging flat. Okay. That's your ruffle. Please leave these. And then when you do your photo, let's say I'm going to do my photo here, right? I can see that your threads are longer. Questions? There's our ruffle. It's cool, huh? How many of you have done ruffles before? Pretty easy. Good. Awesome. I do want to show you one other gathering thing just so that you know it. And this is called zigzag over a string. We use it in costume. It's not as pretty a ruffle, but if you have to do a 10-yard petticoat, you don't want to pull a thread for 10 yards. Trust me, you will break it and you'll be slow and you'll be frustrated. So let me show you how to zigzag over a string. It's exactly like what it sounds like. I'm going to lay a string down. I'm going to zigzag over it. and then I can pull my string. But my string is heavier than a thread, so it will not break. This is just an FYI. This is not required, okay? Let me get my string. So the great advantage of this is I can use a big spool and I can just start this and hold the spool in my lap and I can zigzag over this string and I can do it for 10 yards. When we did petticoats one year, this class made all the petticoat extra ruffles for an 18, I guess we were in 1860 because we were making big, big, big full skirts. So I'm gonna zigzag, putting it roughly at 2.5 again. And I have to jump my zigzag over my string. So I'm holding my string here and I'm gonna zigzag over it so that I can gather. So here we go. You heard my machine didn't really want to go as slow as I wanted to, so. So I'm lining it right up against the 4/8. And you really don't want your needle to pierce this extra string at all. Okay. And now I'm going to pull this out. Oh, I ran out of bobbin thread. Okay, perfect timing. So this thread I can pull all the way through, right? And I don't want to because I want to make sure it stays in there. But this would be where I do my pin and my figure 8. So I'm going to pin this in place. There's my pin and my figure 8, which is the string this time. So I don't want to lose that because this will slide out really quickly. The zigzag really only holds it in. So now to gather this, I can just literally pull on this. It gathers it very quickly. Okay. So that's not required. I just wanted you to know there is a way. You don't have to do this. If you're making a big ruffle skirt or something like that, you would not want to do that double basting stitch gather. And then if I needed to adjust this or take it out, I can just elongate that again because it's very flexible. So this is a costume technique, a true costume technique. And because I have my figure 8 over there, I can let go of that end and I can adjust my ruffles. And the zigzag creates the ruffle placement. So the ruffle is roughly the width of the zigzag. All right, there's a little tidbit for you. Okay, questions or hundreds of them? No questions? Oh wait, maybe I need to, let's see how everybody's doing. So that's our ruffle and zigzag. There is one more thing on our agenda for today, which is our understitching, but I'm going to show it to you on the page. But I also need to talk about our next big project because this ends our sewing portfolio project. After understitching, you'll have all the information you need to do the entire project. So that needs to come and be finished, okay? And then we'll talk about our crew handbook project, which is where we go from sketch to stage. And we'll be doing that with Antigone, and I'll be taking you through the whole script, and you'll be detailing that script out. So that's our next section. Let's go back to our understitching page just for a moment. So this is where we ended with ruffle. And now everyone has your ruffle that can look like this. I need you to review this understitching portion. This is a stitching a facing with understitching so that you can see what it does. We will be doing this. Stitching it, you notch if you're going into something bigger, or you clip if you're going into something smaller. Okay. Top stitching you see on both sides, that's what we've done. Understitching you do not see on the right side of the garment, only the underside. Let me go back. Trying to get rid of, there we go. Okay. Understitching is simply stitching a line close to the edge of a facing to keep it from rolling towards the outside. It's handy around a neckline. It keeps the facing or lining firmly on the inside of your garment without any stitches showing on the outside. This is a YouTube that you can watch, and here's the document that will help you remember what to do. Page 199 in your textbook. The purpose is to prevent the seam from rolling out to the right side. I just said that in the, it's in this portion right here, to keep it from rolling to the outside. To help a curved seam lie flat. Using the pieces you have for you, place your interfacing against the facing. With right sides together, stitch with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Grade the seam allowance. This means that you're going to make a stair step cut, okay? And then cut the garment side seam the longest. The garment seam allowance will be trimmed the longest, and then clip all seam allowances and press. Stitch on the top side of the facing close to the seam line. Turn and press. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Before I do that, okay, how are you guys doing? Are you feeling overloaded? Is this something you want to do on your own first, and then we can touch back on it on Wednesday?
Kind of feeling like it might be better to do the
One
Ruffle project and then move on to this one.
Okay, so I think that's probably correct, but what you really need to make sure that we do is then make sure that all of your seams are completed, that your ruffle is completed so that we can move on to this next piece, okay? And you have the sample for this already. Everyone has this sample. You don't have to cut it. It's already prepared for you. So let's just pause for a moment and I'm just going to record at the end of this meeting to remind everyone that we're working on Antigone. Please read Antigone. It's in your resources that you can access off of the homepage. And then on Wednesday, we will be finishing up understitching, and we'll be discussing Antigone and talk about this process of the crew handbook, how we go from the sketch to the stage through measurements, through research, through doing a cross plot of breaking the script down, creating a calendar, and how that works. So please be prepared for that. And then the fitting and costume process is noted in your book, page 166 to 69 and 244 to 288. Any questions? How many of you would just prefer to sign off so that you can work alone? Otherwise, I'm happy to stay here. But I'm going to stop the recording, and I think we're done with the recording for today.